Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Adjustments meeting for May 1st, 2017, to review facts and finding and relevant criteria to our meeting on April 25th. First order of business is approval of minutes from that meeting. Does anybody have comments who would like to start?
I have a couple of comments. I don't know if they're necessarily corrections, although one might be. So on page 2, it starts with, sort of reflects the presentation. It starts with Comstock asked staff's reason. I am speaking into the mic, man. If it's not on, no, I guess it's on, apparently. So in the third line, it says commissioners express. Commissioners, of course, is not, I don't know what our official title is, but I assume that's a remnant from like the commission. I don't know what that's a remnant from. But as I recall that conversation, I asked Ryan why they didn't do midday parking. I don't remember what the response was. And then I suggested we probably should have had it, but I don't know if that needs to be better reflected in that part of it, or if commissioners express the desire is sufficient. The other part that's missing from that paragraph is I also asked. Well, two things are missing. There's none of the information in Ryan's presentation about the percentage or the amount of existing educational institutional use downtown, which comes up again in the factual conclusions, but it's never presented. Steve's here now. Can we? Yeah. But it's never presented in the minutes. And so there's also not that I asked Ryan why, if the parking lot, the existing parking lot was included, and then what the size of that parking lot was. So during that conversation, I asked whether the numbers that were presented included the existing parking lot that's part of is required as part of the CUP, and I think Ryan said it was not included. Is that right? That's correct. Yeah. And then I suggested since it's part of the existing facility and required to be part of that facility, that it should have been included in the educational uses downtown because it wouldn't exist but for, and it is required to be part of it. So I assume that that's also not included in the numbers in this as well, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's a separate comment. But that paragraph should reflect that conversation to some extent, I think. I'm not being terribly helpful, but I know that's when it happened.
Yeah, I walk a fine line on covering the gist of the conversation without being verbatim, so I...
Right, well, the problem with those two things is they were both things that I suggested were inadequacies in the record, which is partly the justification for my no vote. So the record did not include in the assessment of space utilized by educational institutions, did not include the existing NSA parking lot, which you could just put that. And then I won't complain about or won't suggest a correction to the commissioner's expressed desire. I think that's. Oh, and then one other thing. Do you listen to the video when you do these, or watch the video, or listen to the audio?
Listen to the audio.
Okay, so you probably did accurately reflect what I said, but it wasn't what I was trying to say.
Too bad.
I know.
Sorry.
But I don't know that, I think my emphasis might be different than what your emphasis was, but I'm not sure about that.
At what point?
So at the very end, so the conversation, or my point through the conversation was that I didn't think we could, based on the record, we could satisfy 4 or 7. And then if we imposed the 47 lot parking, then that was in conflict with 7. But where I said I was voting against the motion for that reason only, I meant the inadequacies in the record rather than specifically RC as number 7. It says, Long emphasized he didn't think the board could satisfy number 7 with the information before them. So he's against the motion for that reason only. It suggests that it was only 7, but it was really that remember we talked about balancing requiring parking and then where to put it. I don't know if there's a better, I don't even know how I would suggest to state it. I would put, to be honest with you, I would put could satisfy the RCS with the information before them, and that would satisfy me and be consistent with the point I was making, instead of number 7. Is that okay?
I'd have to go back and listen to the recording, because I've been told that I have to, if
Well, the reason so this is a general.
recording what was said, not necessarily what you meant.
No, that's fine. But the problem with them as written is, and maybe this is just the way it is, but it places undue emphasis on that where the other conversation isn't given the same specificity. And so you have points made earlier that don't have the same specificity as that particular point, and so it places undue emphasis on one point when they were all should have been equally emphasized. And if that's what I said, then that's what I said, and I won't ask you to change it. But that wasn't. I mean, throughout the conversation, it was about that balance between providing parking and then not knowing where it would be. So are we, in fact, providing adequate parking if we didn't do it? So my point was we didn't do the traffic study at the time I thought we should do it. We don't know how much space they're already taking, so we don't know what the parking need should be. And then if we decide we know what the parking need should be and try to remedy it, then we don't know where it's going to be, and so we don't know. In fact, we don't know if it's going to satisfy the needs in number 4, and then if it's downtown, we don't know how it conflicts with number 7. That was the point. But maybe I just wanted to make that again, and you can ignore what I just said.
I actually agree with what Jerry said, because it brought up a point that I made later was when we were borderlining on how many parking stalls to impose, more or less. And that's when I said, well, if we impose more, then we're going further down that slippery slope to what Jerry was in opposition to, that it was, we don't know exactly how many more or less stalls were going to affect the decision, which is what you were opposed to, not necessarily the criteria, but the effect that it would have, right? The unknown effect?
Yeah, it was. So if we go back, like I just said, if we go back to the beginning, if I think that the traffic study was inadequate, which, sorry, I do, I think it should have been 11:30 to 2, sometime in that area, at least if we're doing averages, then we don't know what the true parking effect is. And so we can't know if 47 is sufficient, which is kind of what Marshall made. But then if we assume that it is, if we say, okay, we can satisfy 4 and or 5, depending on how you characterize it, because we're adding all this parking, but we don't know where we're going to put it, and then we don't know if it's going to remove retail and office space downtown, and so then we can't satisfy, I think, 1. Obviously, I mean, I disagreed with you on that point about whether we're actually considering that effect, and then 7, because we don't know how we're affecting the downtown.
But what we got to do is adequately reflect what's in the minutes, and if it wasn't in the minutes, then it's a moot point for approving minutes.
But so maybe this is really just a comment for the future. Like, some things get close to verbatim and some things don't, and I know it's super hard, and I wouldn't want to do it. But then that starts to emphasize the things that get verbatim more than the things that don't, even if it's not really the emphasis in the conversation, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so when I saw that thing is almost the last thing I said, it looks like that's the only reason I'm voting this way, and that's not what the conversation was.
Could we make a motion as such to say, please check the minutes and see what Jerry actually said?
No, I don't. I trust Ann. It was more the way that, what, and that's the. If I had wanted to really complain, I would have gone and listened to myself, I think. So I just wanted to point out that I don't think that was what I was emphasizing. I mean, I think there was more that was in it than just that comment. And that comment might have been perfectly accurate, but it just comes off as having more emphasis than it should have otherwise had. But so with those comments rather than corrections, I'll say I'm okay with it. Oh, no, I am not. Actually, what I said earlier about that first paragraph on page 2 should include that something like, and it doesn't fit because that information's not in here, but, Long asked if how would you characterize that data, Ryan, on the amount of space used by existing educational institutions? Something like that?
That is perfectly accurate.
Okay, so Long asked if the amount of space used by existing educational institutions included the existing lot required as part of NSA's current permit. Do we refer to you as Mr. or as... Do we refer to you in here, Ryan? Anyway, Staff. You'd prefer it that way, I assume, right?
Yes.
Staff replied that it didn't. Long suggested that it should, something like that. Is that okay, Ann?
Sure.
That did happen.
Yeah.
Brian, you remember that, right?
So are you asking me to go back and reread it or re-listen to it?
No, I don't want
Put
you to
it in-
re-listen to it. I think that's a correction to something that should be in there, and I think everybody who's here remembers that part of the conversation. Ryan remembers it, I know.
Okay.
Just add those comments in under the part of the staff's
Yeah, so it would be...
discussions, or part of the staff's presentation on that first full paragraph of page 2.
Yeah, so it would be probably... Marshall, did you go first? I think I asked right after... Oh, no, we went down the line. So it would be... probably right after... Somewhere right... It could just be added at the very end, actually.
Yeah, because you're towards the end there.
Yeah, and it would have been when I was asking about parking.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, I've got one, or I actually got a couple. On the same meeting minutes, not the criteria, on page 5, the second paragraph, actually, that last sentence doesn't end. It says, Long repeated the caution about keeping comments, and then it nothing,
Text drop.
yeah, text drop. So it's an unfinished sentence. Do you recall?
Where am I?
Page
Right there.
5.
Long repeat the comment about keeping comments. So it's going to be, what did you say the first time? Long,
It's supposed to be.
Testimony.
I would just say about avoiding comments about religious beliefs.
Yeah, it was the
Or-
First Amendment issues.
Yeah.
That's what that was. And then the other thing which we now know that I want added because it was an impactful thing that an individual stated, and we now know that individual was Alex. Yeah. And is that where it goes? Page 3. Anyway, he made the comment that we have a successful farmers market. And again, this is verbatim because I don't remember exactly how he stated it, but we have a successful farmers market every Saturday with hundreds of pedestrians, and it's successful even though we eliminate 3 blocks of parking. And to me, that was very impactful because it's like we always complain about parking, and yet something is successful without it.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that's part of the record because it was a huge deciding factor for me.
And that, to a certain extent, that is in there. If you look at his last comment, he opposed any parking requirements because people find places to park during downtown events, even when multiple blocks are closed off. But I know he was referring to farmers market.
He specifically referred to farmers market, which is a consistent. It doesn't happen once or twice a year, like a fair or parade. It happens every Saturday for those 5 or 6 months, and it's consistent and it works. I can't explain why. No one, I just wanted it part of the record. With regards to the relevant, actually,
We want to
does
vote
it-
on this first.
yeah,
Vote on this
let's,
first, right?
before we jump into that. Any other comments that anybody caught? Marshall?
No?
No.
Steve, did you have any others?
No, not on that part.
Okay. So with those questions and comments, can I hear a motion?
I'll move to approve the minutes
As amended?
as amended.
Second?
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Who's the
That was
second?
everybody.
Jerry was the second.
And I'm an abstainer.
And we have, that's what I was looking at you. We have, the motion passes, we have 5 yeses and 1 abstention.
This is Lorene Sorensen, and I would like to make a proposal based on some technological issues that I had, and I believe the other person who was absent at the hearing also had, where we were not able to access the online audio or video transcript of the meeting. And I know when I spoke with Ann, she said the possibility would be to table the motion to approve the action itself until the next available date, which is 2 weeks, so that Annette and I could have the opportunity to obtain technology and or work with the city IT staff so that we could actually view the materials. Because I made repeated attempts to open up the files. I downloaded the software that was required, and I still wasn't successful in opening up any of the files.
So I mentioned this to Joe just a second ago. We're a bit constrained by how we do things, and I think I don't want to say the way we do things is wrong, but it's different than a traditional hearing examiner, how a hearing examiner would operate, in that we made a decision already at the meeting last, what day was that, Tuesday, Wednesday?
Tuesday of last week.
Tuesday. So normally, a hearing examiner would hold the hearing, receive all the evidence, and then take the matter under consideration, prepare a decision, and issue a decision at some later date, which I think is a better way to go about this, honestly, so that we can absorb the information. But we already made the decision on them, I think, to approve it, and it's a little weird to be now making a decision to justify the decision we already made. So to some extent, maybe what we're doing now is making the actual decision, and what we did on Tuesday, I don't even know how that works, because we made a decision without any findings of fact that would justify a decision. And if that's a legitimate decision, then your review of the record presumably couldn't change it, because we've already voted on it. In a different world where we took it under advisement and we're actually considering the merits today, then of course I would support you 100%. You should be able to review the record and participate in the decision. But I don't. So
Normally, or we used to just do the motion based on what we found that night as our basis and fact and findings.
I'm used to being on the end.
Approve or disapprove, and if we approved, then we went to relevant criteria, and we actually just generated them right then. What we've done is, since all that is part of the record, rather than us try to word it, it's not that we're rethinking our decision today, we just ask for staff to take what's on the record, put it from words, spoken words, to written words, for us to come in here and do nothing more than, yes, this is what we said, and then approve it, rather than take time to try to put that into words while we're sitting up here. We ask the staff to put it into words while they're sitting at their desk with the audio record to be able to accurately and more completely and concisely do it. So I would be more in favor of going back to the old route rather than having a public hearing where a decision is then postponed.
That's how it's done.
I'm just
in
saying,
most places.
it then just generates a second night that we end up with a whole bunch of people come back here to see what we say, and then it just becomes another discussion and debate. So I'd like to keep it to the one night. Now, we've got a motion. I don't have a second
It
yet.
wasn't a motion, it was a proposal.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good, because I was waiting, I didn't want a second to happen yet. My concern is, was it just you and Annette that couldn't get it, or can the public not access it? Does that become a greater issue than just our board members not being able to access it?
This is a concern that I have about even as to the open meetings issue, because I looked at this on a couple of different Apple devices. The city's website, where you can click and you're supposed to be able to listen to or view the audio and video transcripts, says that this must be done using Microsoft Silverlight and Internet Explorer. I'm running on Mac. Internet Explorer is no longer available, and even though I was finally able to get a Silverlight installer, it was after a couple of error messages coming in from Microsoft themselves. I did manage to get the Silverlight download. That took a while, but then when I tried to click on either the audio or the video files, it just kept looping me back to the download Silverlight webpage. I think that there are a lot of members of the public who are not running on, who don't have Internet Explorer, and who are running on platforms other than Microsoft's, and I would suspect, based on a very small sample, because Annette said she couldn't get in either, that a lot of members of the public have not been able to look at these transcripts.
That's consistent with my experience as well, that I'm about 50% success rate, and that's on my university computer that has active tech all the time. It's up to date. And like when my kids testified, tried to send that to my in-laws and my mom, and they couldn't make it work either. I mean, it's a system that does not work very well.
So then you're saying it goes beyond just Mac versus Windows?
Yeah.
Because I would say the percentage of Mac to Microsoft is less, but is less, but if the Microsoft is not working either.
It's my computer at work. I get it about 50% of the time, and then getting searching within a meeting is almost impossible.
So then I guess this exemplifies even more. This sounds like it's a problem that goes beyond just this particular hearing. Mm-hmm. So I would prefer not to bog this particular process on something that I think the city needs to address, because if it's not working for Board of Adjustments agenda and meetings, it's not working for City Council ones, it's not working for P&Z ones, and so I don't want to bog this particular
and I think
meeting
that
with that.
And again, I think that the way we conduct it, we've in effect already made a decision, and so puts us in an odd position that even if Lorraine we're able to access it, we're not reconsidering the decision. We're just
we're literally just reviewing stuff that was already said.
Right, and ordinarily it would have happened that same night, but as I recall, it was 11:15 or so, and I think it was due to the hour we.
Well, no, we did this in part to make it clear when the decision was reached. Because remember the way we did it before, we didn't know when when the actual decision was reached, and there was no point at which
in times before we've got and we've that's true, but we've had in the times before we have put on the record what we believe the relevant criterion standards are, and I think we punted on this one just due to the lateness hour. But I agree with you, Jerry, that we wanted a hearing today, so there was a definite decision date.
Which I think we
because
have
an
to do
appeal process starts running. Yeah. Presumably, if we approve this and sign this today, an appeal process starts running.
Right.
Or appeal time frame, I should say.
That, and there was a lot of testimony, and this is a big enough and drives enough interest that any appeal would require, it can only be based on the record, so we wanted to make sure that the record was thorough and accurate. And so that's actually why we're here.
So, boss, how do you want to proceed?
What's that?
I said, how do you want to proceed? Boss.
Well, it's only a proposal, it's not a motion.
Right.
I could embody it as a motion and see if get a second, and we could vote on that aspect of it.
Before you do, can I ask what you, I mean, if we did postpone it and you had the chance to review the record, what do you anticipate? Because we run into a problem that, I mean, the justification for my no vote sort of requires me to vote no on this, because that was why I said this was inadequate. I don't know what Marshall will do, but I mean, I think
I don't. Well, let me
if we put ourselves in a position where we end up voting no on these.
If you or Annette had access to it, the only thing you would be doing is finding Scribners that the other 5 of us who are here don't find.
Right,
and
change the act.
and I don't want to deflate it, or devalue it, but I don't see the value in it. Because if you
vote or testify,
yeah.
anything.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm just trying to clarify, since I did receive a communication from the city, that Annette and I would be able to vote if we were able to view or hear the testimony,
Right.
and therefore make ourselves informed. So I guess I want clarity on, so would we have only been able to vote on,
You only would have been able to comment on whether or not these were accurate or not. You wouldn't be voting for or against the motion.
but only as to whether the materials accurately
Reflect
reflected
the
what
meeting.
we heard in the meeting?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Did you want to put it forward as a motion?
So there would be, neither Annette nor I would have been able to vote.
You couldn't have added to. You couldn't have added to the record.
Okay.
For the very same reason, when we first started this discussion, Jerry was trying to decide what he intended it to say versus what it actually read, and so even with that Scribner, it became debatable. So Ann is going to be able to go back to the record and see how he actually stated it, and if he stated it differently, it'll get changed as an amendment. If not, it stays the same. So this, again, is not the public hearing. We're not changing anything in here other than making the corrections to it. So I don't see the value in a motion to postpone this, to only give you and Annette the time to review it, either written or by the, actually, written even wouldn't be viable, because that, you wouldn't catch the Scribner.
Correct.
So you'd have to watch
Right.
it. At which point, you still can't make comment. You can only decide whether it's accurate or not. So I don't see it as being a valid thing.
So you're saying Annette and I could not vote on whether the project met the relevant criteria?
Correct.
That decision's already been made.
We would still have to abstain on that. Okay.
No, well, that decision's already been made. That was my point earlier, is the
Okay.
board already voted to approve the CUP. I kind of think going forward, we might reconsider whether that's a good idea, and maybe I'm the one who thinks that, but we already made that decision. That decision's done. This is just the moment at which we approve the written form of the decision
what
we made.
decided.
Okay.
And
It's no different than a judge making the decision from the bench and then providing a written decision later.
Thank you for
And-
putting it in my
Same
language.
way, Jerry, you can vote in favor of the RCS being the correct record of your no vote on the,
Yeah, I was going to ask you that, because if someone votes no against the minutes or the relevant criteria, then that means they're wrong and they need to be corrected.
No,
Not necessarily.
No,
It
yeah.
just means you don't agree with it, with the relevant criteria.
How can you agree or disagree with something that was either said or not said?
Because
I disagree that these factual findings support the RCS.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
Gotcha. That's different than the minutes.
Yes.
The minutes are either correct or they're not correct.
Right.
If it's missing something that we didn't have, then that Okay, that clarifies things.
All right.
I have a staff quick question before
Sure.
we move on. Who has the right to appeal, Ryan? An aggrieved party, a member of the board, or a member of the city council?
As far as who now, can you break that down for me, Marshall? Because
Well, during an appeal process, there's only certain people that have the right, and maybe Jerry knows, who have the right to appeal, and it's usually an aggrieved party, or I think a member of the city council or the mayor can actually appeal a decision by this board.
so typically the appeal process is generally open to anybody within the citizen status. Essentially, anybody can appeal the process.
That was my understanding.
But
Jerry,
it's-
do you know the answer to that question?
there's also there's the 10-day appeal process that is stated forth within Moscow City Code, but then there's the 28-day countdown for a takings analysis, and a takings analysis is involved with the grieving party who's directly affected by that. So the state adjutant general is the one that dictates who and why they would be qualified to conform to some sort of takings analysis.
But I was under the understanding that it had to be an aggrieved party. You couldn't just take somebody that
Wasn't present?
well, not necessarily wasn't present, but just really didn't have an interest. They're just trying to throw a cog in the wheel, so they're going to appeal it. I thought it had to be an aggrieved party.
Technically, anybody can file for an appeal. There's a couple steps. They have to have a letter of intent addressed to City Council, the mayor, and the zoning administrator, and they also need to go through essentially a permit. It's a $220 fine or a $220 cost for filing for that permit.
It says any applicant, city representative, or affected person. That's for the appeal to the city council. The appeal to, and the takings analysis is something different,
It
right?
is.
So the appeal of the council's decision, I don't recall what that list is.
So the second one, or the third one that said an affected person would come back to what you're saying. If it's just someone, it's not near the site, related in any way
Live
to
in
the
the town.
use of the site, or, couldn't just do it just to do it.
I don't know if that's defined or not.
Yeah, is there any definition of what an affected person is in context?
A person who shows to the city by a preponderance of evidence that such person has an interest which may be adversely affected by the issuance or denial of a permit authorizing development of or by a decision of the city. Permit authorizing development or by a decision of the city. I think here, where it's downtown, I think anybody could do that. Now, the question is whether you have to have participated in the process, I think is different. But the interesting thing to me is the city representative one, so could I appeal it if I wanted to?
I think you can.
And I think I could. I mean, I don't know if I would for collegiality reasons, but unless I really got mad at one of the things you did.
I knew as mayor I could appeal a decision of this board.
Which again is the reason why we're doing this as a separate meeting, because under an appeal, it's not a public testimony. It is only the city council looks at this approved record, and that's the only information they have. So that's why
They can
doing
receive
what we're
legal
doing.
argument by
Right,
the appellant, but no factual.
exactly, is to look through this, and our job tonight is to make sure that we have created the most concise, accurate representation of what happened last Tuesday.
Thank
Which
you.
unfortunately, I think, leaves you out because you just couldn't get the access to it. But to me, that goes beyond this meeting. It goes beyond this board. I think the city, and I don't. Will you let someone know?
Actually,
the meeting that starts in 45 minutes.
In
They're
45 minutes, it'll either get approved or denied to
Right.
have better internet access and a new website. So it will be adjusted shortly.
And will that, because the city tries to host all its own video right now, locally, right?
That's
Instead
correct.
of using somebody else that knows how to do it?
That's correct.
Okay. And
You might want to stick around.
yeah.
I said you might want to stick around for a city council meeting.
I'm going to go have a
Come on,
cheeseburger. I've been craving one all day.
Parking's easy this time of night.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to move on to the relevant criteria if there's no other comment on this one.
Nope.
Unless you wanted to make her motion.
I'm not going to not let you, but That's up to you. If you want to make a motion,
think
you're
for the
more than
sake-
welcome to.
Yeah, for the sake of process.
Okay.
Yeah, I move that the consideration of the criteria and standards be tabled until Monday, May 15th, so that commission members who were unable to attend the meeting in person can access the transcript electronically and make an informed, and therefore participate in a vote on the approval of the council's, of the board's decision.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? So without a second, the motion dies. Okay. Now, on to the relevant statement and criteria, and who would like to go first?
I do have a comment, but now if I can find where it is. So this is related to what I already specifically said, and it's in at the very, very end, the last paragraph of on page 4 of the relevant facts and conclusions. Just to point out, and Ryan, you can correct me if this is wrong, that this square footage and the percentage does not include the existing New St. Andrews parking lot.
That is a correct statement.
Okay. And so this reflects, let me just point that out, this does reflect what was presented to us, but it does not include all of the space occupied by educational institutions in the Central Business District.
I also have, in addition to that very same paragraph, right dead center, between where it says a total private developable land area contained, I made it clear that those square footages were based on ground floor areas only, and they didn't reflect buildings that had second and third floors. So I think that ground floor should be added in there between developable land, developable ground floor land.
And I don't know what you want to do with my comment, because this is the information that was provided, but it's not complete.
But Jerry, didn't you ask that during the meeting?
I did, but we didn't get any answer to it. And you might
Other than we knew
did include it.
It didn't include it. But I
Yeah.
think the number of square feet,
Well,
I remember you talking about that.
Yeah, so it says the subject property is 15,900 square feet, and when added to existing school, daycare, and educational institutional uses, the total land area dedicated would be 42,709. But that 42,709 does not include the parking lot, so that statement is in fact inaccurate. But that is the number that was in the presentation.
I mean,
because
would it be sufficient just to 3% of the central business land area, comma, not including the parking lot? Because I remember.
you can put that. Yeah.
Put that in there. I
Yeah.
mean, to make it, because that would accurately reflect
what was
what
in
was
the
said,
record.
yeah.
I mean, you might question whether it helps justify the decision or not, but that's what was said. I mean, that's what you have to find, because that was
It
the
was,
finding.
if you look at the bottom of page 4, 3 lines up, where it starts, the line starts 42,709 square feet, or 3% of the CB land area, comma, not including the existing parking lot used by New St. Andrews. Is that how you wanted it? It was the one off Jackson, right, by MC, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So to be clear, let's see. So it's hard to, because that makes it sound like you'd have to put it after the total land area dedicated to such uses. You'd have to put the parenthetical right there, not including the lot required by NSA's current conditional use permit at, and then if we had an address for it. Because if you put it after the end of the sentence, it sounds like the total land area excluding the parking lot, but in reality it's the total land area dedicated to such uses that does not include it. So I think the easiest way to say the total land area not dedicated to such uses, parentheses, but not including, rather than excluding, but not including the parking lot at, and then whatever, if it has an address on Jackson Street,
6th and Jackson, I believe.
required by the existing conditional use permit for New St. Andrews, close parentheses, something like that. I didn't realize there was an upstairs. Obviously. Now this is, again, I'm going to vote no, so if everybody else is cool, it's whether you guys are cool with that or not. I almost sent you an email saying since I'm going to vote no, I'm just going to go out to eat, but I decided I should come be a pain anyway.
Any more comments on that one?
No, that's it. That's pretty much the one I had.
Steve, any Scribners or comments that you have on this?
The only thing I noticed was on page 3, under B, parking, and under BI or 6, on the second sentence there, it says the word is with, and I think it should be will.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I didn't see anything else that didn't reflect what we had covered in the meeting at all.
I had a comment on the first page under number 3
Of the relevant criteria.
of the relevant criteria. It describes the plans that we received, but it does not list all of the spaces.
Oh, you're in the relevant facts.
The relevant facts, I'm sorry, yeah, of this packet that we're looking at, page 1, item 3. It does not include small conference rooms, restrooms, storage, and exercise space, which was a huge majority of the basement.
Yeah. Yeah, there's apparently a large racquetball court based on my reading and looking at the plans.
Yeah.
Is that the 15,900 square feet? That's the total floor space of the building.
That's the building footprint.
But that's not just the footprint itself, or is it
That's the lot, the overall.
the lot?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know what the square footage of the all floors is? Because that might be where Joe's just talking about in 3 might be in a place to put that.
In the application, it didn't have dimensioning
Then
of
it's
the
not
building
part of the
itself.
record? Okay.
No.
Then never mind.
Okay.
I guess that goes to your point about only talking about lot sizes, right?
On page 2, item 6, it says the subject property is approximately, I'm kind of getting to this, is approximately 15,900 square feet and is located on the east side of Main Street with approximately 130 feet of frontage on Main Street and rear alley access. But it doesn't mention that street frontage is not traditional ground floor street frontage. And that, again, is a crucial...
I thought we saw that. I saw
It-
that.
it
I
mentions
think
it
it's in
throughout.
one of the criteria. I think
It
it was
is.
in one of the criteria. But
It
that's-
is. It's mentioned again, but it seems that it would be appropriately pointed out there because this is making the point that it's 130 feet of street frontage, and throughout the discussions, it was made very clear that it's never been
been
street
used.
frontage because it's not, it was never constructed that way. So I think if we just
Yeah.
Well,
add that it's
but it
not
still
traditional
is.
ground floor,
I mean, it's frontage on Main Street.
but it's
that
not...
statement is accurate.
No. I think that statement is more accurate if it says traditional ground floor. It's not traditional ground floor.
Doesn't frontage simply refer, here in this context, just refer to the length of the facade?
Yeah, that's just literally how much of Main Street it consumes. It's not that it's retail office space or anything like that. It's just how.
Because at that point, you'd start to get into the multi-story aspect of it, which it seems like none of these metrics
Right.
is taking into account.
So, Joe, my response to me is if that were taking into account how much like ground floor, I mean, you could argue it has.
That's why I made the comment.
I know it could have like 390 feet of frontage.
Exactly, which is why I made it clear in this other one that it's only referencing ground floor. All these other square footages you were talking about in that
Yeah,
paragraph?
they're on the ground floor.
They're only on the ground floor. This one is actually not ground floor. And if you think it's clear enough in other parts of this that if this is appealed, City Council understands that as fact.
If that's a relevant fact, that was a relevant fact that was presented to us, that yes, there's 130 feet of frontage, but that frontage is not
traditional.
It's
That's
not
all
like
I'm
this is-
asking to
yeah.
add to it is
Yeah.
it's not addition. It's yes, it's 130 linear feet, but it's not traditional street level store frontage.
And I don't think it's ever been.
No,
The testimony
then
we had,
that was
it's
the
never
point.
been used.
It has
Yeah.
never been. It was never built
Yeah.
that way.
No, you're right. So if I had to add to that, or just to amend what Joe just said, that was totally part of the record, and you are basing your decision on it, so it should probably be in that part. But the sentence is written, the rear alley access is sort of, it's not related to the 130 feet of frontage on Main Street. It's just sort of added there. So maybe you want 3 different sentences there.
Right.
So
Right.
with approximately 130 feet of frontage on Main Street, period, the Main Street frontage is not traditional ground level,
Floor.
however you want to articulate it,
Right.
period.
And the structure has rear alley access.
Yeah, or the parcel or the structure also has rear alley access.
You'd want to put an also in there because it would otherwise imply that it's so non-traditional that you can't even come in the front door. You know, if you just say rear alley access.
Which was actually a comment that I did make during the meeting that I'm not sure where in here it goes because I didn't see it, but I did ask that question about accessibility because they'd have to.
Yeah, ADA accessible. Yeah, so so you mean the last sentence would be that the structure also has rear alley access.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that all right, Joe? Is that consistent with?
Yeah. A couple Scribners that I found on page 5 under the relevant criteria, under item 3, for the correct verbiage on the 6th line, where it says the applicant indicated that a sound engineers will be utilized, we either need to eliminate the A or we need to eliminate the S. So it should read that a sound engineer or that sound engineers. I don't care which, but just in terms of grammar, it needs to be one or the other. And then on the last page, item 5, the very last sentence, additionally, the use of a college is a clean, safe, and productive alternative to the subject property's previous use. That does not create pollution or hazards within the community. That starts a preposition that is referencing the old use and not the new use. And so after use, there needs to be a comma, and that needs to be replaced with and it, so that we're actually referencing the new use does not create pollution or hazards within the community, not referencing that the old bar didn't create pollution or hazards.
Probably need an apostrophe on properties.
It should be,
because it's
a Y, it should be the subject
Yeah.
property with a Y apostrophe S. Only one property.
And those were the only Scribners that I had seen. Anybody else have? Mark?
No, you.
Marshall?
Oh, I have one more. Number 6.
On the last page?
Yep, third line. Licensed design professionals to ensure construction and development. It says licensed design professions.
Yeah.
Agreed.
A suggestion, if you want to hear it, about number 1
On
the
under
RCS.
relevant- Okay.
And again, I was the only one who thought this was an issue, but it seems to me that the way the use is articulated in the code, that it, and maybe this isn't what the council intended, but it seems that it is a conditionally permitted use in the zoning district, assuming that it does not have cumulative impacts when considered in conjunction with existing schools, commercial schools, and educational institutions in the vicinity. And so that's how I read it. And it might be useful if you think to have an explicit finding there that, so you say you find that it's a educational institution, but then you say nothing about the specific consideration. So presumably you've decided that the traffic, parking, safety, and nuisance issues, when considered with existing commercial schools, and educational institutions, do not have cumulative impacts that do not have disproportionate or inappropriate cumulative impacts. I assume that's the decision.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that is the decision. The cumulative impacts aren't so great as to justify denial. And so you need, I think, there should be some.
Yeah, I don't think it hurts to put that in there.
Yeah. Because that is ultimately the finding.
Just make a statement that,
as described herein, this use, when considered with all other existing schools, commercial schools, and educational institutions in the vicinity, does not have disproportionate, or you'll have to think about what that word is, cumulative impacts,
yeah, that'll work.
or inappropriate, or excessive, something like that. Whatever it is that you think is appropriate.
I have one number 2, actually. Second to last line. A mix of
Lorraine,
use.
before we go
Before we
on,
jump to 2, how do we want to word 1?
I mean, if you're okay with, so Mark at least is okay with
Yeah.
it. Steve, I don't know.
I thought
if
you were
you
good
voted
on
yes or.
Well, I agree, because that's why
But
we
it's
added the
the-
parking condition.
Yeah, that's the ultimate. We mitigated that.
Right.
So,
Did you write what I just said?
No, I need you to repeat it, please.
Okay. Did that sound okay?
that sounded okay to me.
Let me ask you and I'm not going to be able to repeat it, but which is the word that you prefer? The cumulative impacts are not
Let's see.
inappropriate for the central business district, or
How about as well as mitigated cumulative impacts?
as mitigated?
Cumulative impacts as mitigated, yeah.
Yeah, sounds good.
Because
Or not.
that's what led us to adding
Right.
the parking
Parking,
condition.
right.
Right. So, how did I start the last one? The board determines that the traffic, parking, safety, and nuisance issues. No, that sounds weird.
I think if we just add as well as
You say-
cumulative.
After special consideration of traffic, parking, safety, nuisance issues, as well as cumulative impacts and proximity to existing schools, commercial schools,
Yeah.
and educational institutions in the vicinity, the board finds that
yeah,
they're,
that the application.
or the board finds that
This proposal, the cumulative impacts of this proposal. See, I would do it as a separate sentence because this is
Yes.
reciting the code. This
Well,
is
right,
just
right,
a
and
code sentence.
I would start that new sentence and just, essentially you'd have to repeat, after consideration of,
Right. The board finds that
The
the
board finds
impacts
that-
of this proposal. So, Ann, what Mark's saying is you just repeat from consideration in the previous sentence, start a new sentence, and copy all of that language, but say after consideration of the
all of these
traffic,
factors that we're supposed to consider. Right.
comma, the board finds that the cumulative impacts or the impacts of this proposal are not
As,
inappropriate in the central business district.
Right. Or have been appropriately,
Mitigated. The impacts of
But
this
as
proposal
mitigated.
as mitigated are not
yeah,
inappropriate in the central business district.
yeah. There it is.
Okay.
And you didn't think you were going to be helpful tonight.
I
I'm
promised
sorry.
I wouldn't be.
I
actually.
know, I remember that.
I'm only laughing because this is why we asked to do this several days later, because this is difficult with a draft in front of us. It's even harder to do after hours of testimony, and we're trying to generate it from scratch.
I was totally ready to keep going for another hour. And that,
Right, you had an option on item, or a correction on item 2.
I do. Yeah, last sentence, it says here, the use does not cause nuisances or detract from our downtown, but rather increases cultural interest, vitality, and a mix of uses that support other businesses in the community.
So that
The
shouldn't
subject-
have an S.
It should not, supports should not have an S. We've got a subject-verb agreement thing going here.
Any other Scribner's, verbal corrections, tenses?
There's also, in number 3, third line down, the last word fines should be lowercase.
Yeah. Right.
Just right after, starts after the bold? The board finds? All right, do I hear a motion to?
I will move to approve the relevant criteria and standards as written and then modified this evening with those modifications that we've put in there.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, I have a motion. I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Abstain.
Abstains? 1? All right, so it passes 3 ayes, 2 nays, 1 abstention. Is that correct? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 1.
2 and
Yeah.
1, yeah.
What were those votes again?
Mark,
Nay.
Mark, Joe, Steve
No, yes.
are yeses.
Yes.
Marshall, Jerry were noes, and Lorraine was an abstention.
Okay.
So it passes 3-2.
Ryan, can I?
Yeah, is there any discussion with this?
No, that's it. It's
That's
done.
it, just.
Well, he asked for a vote before
Yeah, you asked
any
for a vote before
discussion.
we had any discussion.
on the motion.
Oh.
The Idaho Code says the approval or denial of any application required or authorized pursuant to this chapter shall be in writing and accompanied by a reasoned statement that explains the criteria and standards considered relevant, states the relevant contested facts relied upon, and explains the rationale for the decision based on the applicable decisions of the comp plan, the relevant ordinance and statutory provisions pertinent, etc. So I'd like a decision or an opinion by our city attorney as to whether we can, in fact, make a decision approving either a CUP or a variance before we have a written decision. Because it says the decision must be in writing, which suggests that the decisions we make without the writing are not, in fact, decisions, which would mean that Lorraine could review the record and participate in the decision going forward. Is that okay? Can you communicate that to Rob?
So
Absolutely.
does that also mean, since it's not in writing, we couldn't actually even go back to the old route where we make a
Oh.
decision and then actually come up with those? We would,
So take
We
2
what?
meetings for every.
so
Yeah.
everything would take 2 meetings. The first one to make our decisions, close the hearing, have board discussions, and then have a draft generated?
I think so.
Mr. Long, what title were you getting off of?
That is 67-6535.
Thank you.
2. So we could, a lot of what we just did could be done, I think, passing drafts back and forth. I don't think there's any reason that part has to be here, but then we'd have to separate meeting to approve, to present the language and then approve it. But all of the edits and stuff wouldn't have to be done in a meeting. And so we could have had staff prepare this, then we could have via email suggested the changes we did today. Basically, everything we just did right now was only changing the language, and then have the meeting to vote.
Yeah, but we were making those decisions based on a
On the-
decision.
Right. No,
If,
well,
if you deny then you actually then you don't even have to come up with
no,
your-
we still do. The denial has to be in writing as well, based on the same same criteria.
But how you so how you craft those, we would potentially have had from the last meeting coming to this meeting, we wouldn't have known pro or con how to draft relevant criteria, because we all 5 would have had different.
Well, we still could we could have a vote. We could motion it as like a tentative vote based on the hearing today to be, I don't know, I mean,
I think it
I'm
comes
just
back to
telling
the
you what it
interpretation
says.
we're asking
Yeah,
for.
for Rod. For the
For the
We'll
city
get
attorney
the
to
city's
tell
attorney
us.
take on that for the board and
Thanks.
get that clarified for all of you, so we can
I mean,
have
that's
further
how
discussion.
that's how courts, appellate
Reviewed.
courts do it, and they do it in chambers. They fight it out and propose to each. Because the way we could do it is, I could have written what I thought a no decision would have looked like, and you guys could have written a yes decision, and then we bring them both and vote on which one to adopt. That'd be one way to go about it.
Because even our own individual yeses and no reasons would be different,
Right.
potentially.
Thanks. But so I'd like to. That clarifies the issue we had with Lorraine too, that whether she
Right.
could participate in this, and if we haven't made the decision until today, then we would have probably had to postpone it so she could look at, have a chance
So
to
that,
do
that means then our board deliberations would actually continue on to a second meeting.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Which
Okay.
you don't have to reopen the public hearing though.
Right.
There's no requirement
Right.
to do that.
Okay.
And state code authorizes these sorts of deliberations to be conducted electronically as well as in real time. Yeah.
That I don't know. Because technically we are a board of hearing examiners, and hearing examiners are authorized to do any business that the city council could otherwise do. So we're just the stand-in for city council, technically. And so I presume, we're governed by the hearing procedures, but
But we got in hot water a couple years ago about emails, and I forget who questioned it, and so everyone wanted our emails as part of the public record.
Yeah, because there's also a discoverability issue with emails.
well,
So-
ask Rod.
Yeah.
We'll get
So
the
I
city attorney's
don't
take
want to
on
open up a whole can of worms.
You being told that you're supposed to finish up your meeting, I think.
Yes. Any more board communications? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
I have a motion, I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Done.